Hello and welcome to the Genius Move Audio Academy podcast. My name is Paul Brewer. In this podcast, I'll chat to people who were professionally involved in the music business both here in Ireland and abroad. If you're listening to this, perhaps you have an interest in learning. Please visit geniusmove.ie, check my courses or book a one-to-one teaching session. Today's guest is the solo artist Jape, known to his mammy as Richie Egan. Richie was also bass player for the math rock band the Redneck Manifesto. Coincidentally, and this was by coincidence, Jape has a new album out on the 29th of September entitled Endless Thread. I first met Richie when he was a customer of a company I worked for, maybe 15 years ago. In fact, we started chatting about the unit I sold to him straight away, which is where we joined the conversation.
And bizarre, I think I mentioned you on the message, but I'm still using the Apogee 800 Rosetta. I still have that on the go. I had some problems with the firewire on it where basically, obviously, firewire became non-existent. So I had to get another Apogee box and take an optical.
Made that out.
Yeah. And it's brilliant. I couldn't be without it. I actually bought a second one, which I then found out I can't use it because there's limitations on the ins and outs on the Apogee control, but I have a second one in case the other one breaks anyway.
I should mention that I spent a lot of yesterday listening to the body of work. There's quite a difference between the first ones to the later ones, as you would expect anyway. How do you see that progress in terms of the kind of music reflects your development, in my mind?
Yeah, I think it does. Yeah, and as an artist as well, I mean, when you're young, maybe you have an energy that's very much, you have to get it into the world, but you don't have like the technical know-how really. But that doesn't necessarily matter, you know? I mean, you get your voice out there by hook or by crook. And some of the first records I recorded on like just really basic equipment, you know? And some might argue they're better than the later ones, you know? It's like they're so when you have an artist's voice and you're young, yeah, you have to be heard, you know. Whereas when you get older, you learn, you're kind of more considered in your actions, and subtlety comes into play a bit more, I think, when you get older. And and for me, with production choices and stuff like that, I probably got a bit more subtle as I got older, you know.
And do you produce your own stuff? Is it?
I produce everything, as in I record everything myself and produce it myself. I tend to use like either somebody mix it or somebody master it, because I do think that it's important to get a second set of ears. Because you can get, you know, if you're in a badly treated room or something, you can get like kind of the audio equivalent to snowblind, and you don't hear the mistakes, and you start not even hearing the stuff after a while. So I think it's always good to get a second set of ears in that you trust, who can just take it up. It's like anything in the audio game, you know, just taking it up that extra 5 or 10% at the end is kind of is the goal.
Yeah.
And that's,
and
you know.
Is Jape, in terms of performance, a band? Like, do you have regular members?
I mean, it's, you know, for a while, like I sort of I did it pretty hardcore up till about 2016, I'd say. And then basically fell back away from it. So up to that point, there was definitely a band element of it. And since then, it's been a sort of revolving door of musicians. I can play as small as a 2-piece or even a solo gig, and go up as far as a 6-piece.
All right.
Depending on the gig. Yeah. And depending on how I want to do it live as well. It's kind of changes in my head. It has over the years. So it's me. But I mean, if I do have musicians involved live, I like to treat the songs as completely new entities and build them completely differently, and let people bring their own thing to the table, because they're, you know, that's the one thing I dislike about being a solo artist, is you're missing other people's viewpoints and musical viewpoints a bit. So when I play live, it gives me an opportunity. If somebody has a thing they're thinking that sounds cool, might change the song a bit, I love that, you know, that's great. Someone brings that to the table. It's a vibe.
Right, so you're essentially rewriting the songs for the band.
Yeah. And for live as well, because some of the songs maybe would work in a listening environment, wouldn't work so well live. So dynamically, I try to keep things interesting from a live point of view as well.
Observing a sort of body work as I did yesterday, it seems to me that the earlier stuff had millions and millions of ideas all firing at you at the one time. And then over time, it developed, and now it's essentially, the current work is acoustic based. Would that be a fair statement?
Yeah, and well, the funny thing is now I have a new record coming out at the end of in September, and basically it's gone again in a more of a, it's sort of gone in a sort of a band-esque way, even if it's just me. So the last stuff has been acoustic, yeah. Like, that's probably one reason why I'm not very successful as an artist, is that I definitely feel like I don't like to, if I find something that's successful, it can be guaranteed that the next thing I do will be the opposite of that, basically.
Right.
Because for me, there's a joy in being an artist that I personally can only find by not repeating what I've done before. So it's like you go down these alleys, try and explore them, see what I can come up with, then maybe exploit what I come up with, call that a record, and then like live a little bit and then come back and see where I am and what's exciting me then, Yeah, so it's constantly changing and constantly evolving in my head, depending on what I'm interested in.
Right.
At the time.
Now, should we go back to the sort of the beginning? What's your current status? Are you a full-time musician? Is that your job?
Yeah, I've been doing like commercial work and writing for sort of I've been making music as a living, basically, not Jape as my living.
Right.
But I've been able to survive as a musician, sometimes sailing very close to the wind, you might say, but managing to get through just from having many different strings to my bow in terms of doing like soundtracky stuff as well, and that sort of thing. Which I think is facing all musicians at the moment. It's becoming harder and harder to survive as a musician, and in fact, I even feel like it's even getting harder. So I feel in a little bit way it's like the last days of Rome for independent musicians who just want to make music. But it's a challenge, and so far I've been able to keep my head above water with music. But I have definitely had moments when I've been sort of questioning my life choices. Yeah.
Yeah.
Big time.
I don't know if you're aware of a previous podcast, but the last one I did was with a guy called Rupert Cobb. And he was saying that you're a perfect example of it. Somebody who starts off in a band and spreads. Selling music, essentially, is what you do now. And it's all sorts to all sorts of people. So where are you based now?
I'm based in Malmo in Sweden, so that's where I am now. I have a studio which I'm sitting in Malmo in Sweden, south of Sweden.
And how did you end up in Malmo?
I ended up through meeting my wife in Dublin, and we lived in Dublin for maybe 10 years, and then we decided to move to Sweden to try it out, basically.
Is she Irish?
No, she's Swedish.
Ah, right.
She's Swedish. So we came here, and then we had kids, basically, so we kind of dropped anchor a bit. For a while, I was missing Dublin and missing Ireland quite a lot because I had so many connections there. I still have a lot of connections there in the music world. But after time, I came to like the solitude and the contemplative nature of living in a kind of a quiet city. So now I quite like it here. As long as I can get back to Ireland like twice a year, see my friends and see my family and kind of recharge the batteries in that way.
And go to a electric picnic, or?
Yeah, something like that, yeah. Yeah, one or two festivals.
Yeah, indeed. So do you think that moving from Dublin has, it's obviously taken you out of the Dublin scene? Is your music moving in a different direction because of that?
Well, it's a weird one, right? So when you're going through life, there's going to be a time when you need to figure things out outside of, inverted commas, a scene, Like things are going to fall away from you at some point, and you're left with a kind of a lot of questions about why you do what you do and, how it is to be a human. And in that sense, maybe I feel like it was a little premature that I left Ireland because I feel like maybe I could have had more time there. But also, I feel like it's a blessing because it enabled me to kind of focus on the bigger questions that I would have had to focus on at some point anyway.
Right.
So it's all good. It's all good. Like you have to be, you have to end up being happy where you are.
Absolutely.
Wherever that is. And that to get to that point, I think is the goal.
Yeah. And do you think that sort of developmental thought perhaps doesn't quite line up with the music business, the making a record tour and all that.
I think, yeah, like the actual, I think it lines up very well with the creation of songs because
Right.
songs by themselves are very contemplative things. But yeah, in terms of the actual business of music, um, yeah, I mean, yeah, it can be a grim place, you know. So you got to kind of put your work first and see what happens after that. And I think if you can do the first bit well, the second bit will happen.
So the first bit, writing songs.
Yeah, if you do that well, the second bit will happen. But if you chase the second bit, the first bit won't happen.
Yeah.
So I think you're better off. You just there's a lot outside your control, so you're better off just like having. I have a good like manager Ken who works for Faction Records, and I'm still with Faction, an independent label in Dublin, and I've been with them for a few years. So Ken and me have a good relationship, you know, and we've been together for a good few years. And he is a little bit like a buffer. I mean, I wouldn't be as successful as some of his other clients, but I don't demand too much of him either. So I think it's a pretty mutually beneficial relationship, and he's a lovely human. So, which is a rare thing in the music industry. So we've been together for quite a few years. So I just kind of take his guidance on that end of things and just sort of stick to my creation over here.
Now, I'm going to say something slightly controversial, which I might cut out in the edit. But like, I remember back in the day when I was around Dublin, there seemed to be a lot of musicians who were angry, as in pissed off because they weren't successful.
Oh yeah, yeah,
And
Jesus.
that created an energy which wasn't positive to my mind. Can you relate to that? Does that represent the same?
Coming up, Paul, my motto in life, I've had it since I was a child, is don't get bitter. That's my motto in life. And basically, if I can do that, then everything else is grand. And I've definitely seen firsthand in some cases people who don't get as successful as they think they should be and who become bitter and angry at the world, you know? But like, that's just like poisonous for them. And it's, it's the only person it's harming is themselves, you know? So I feel sorry for people who end up like that. Um, and I definitely think it can happen because the ego can be strong, you know, and it's
Which is
important
necessary to be an
to,
artist as well.
yeah, exactly. There's a balance. You're on a tightrope between delusion and pride, you know, and you kind of, some people go too far on the delusion end of things, and you see it a lot. And there's times when I question my own self and say, am I just deludedly doing this? But I think when I really consider it, I try to just stay pure if I can. And I mean, I know when I've done a pure thing, and if it's successful, great. And if it's not, the great, what I love is I just move on to the next thing, you know? There's something else to do. You know, it's not like you've done a
Right. So,
record,
so
you're
past
done.
work isn't dragging you down.
The password, it's to be, it's like, it's even, it's different to that. It's like it's done, you know, there's no point to go back to it. It's done. Now I get to move on to something else with that experience in the bag and see what I can take from it or leave behind and see how I can build something else that, it's like as soon as I finish a record, the only thing I'm thinking about
The
is
next
the
one.
next one and how can I change? How can I change? Do the next one better, you know? That's all I really care about. So, um, yeah, so I think so far that's worked in terms of not being bitter for me. But I do know what you mean. There's a certain typo, right? I mean, no, just go into wheelings on a lock in. Although we're probably too old for that now, but you definitely see a few of them in there.
Again, we're straying to the music side as opposed to the technical side, which is sort of the point of this
Yeah,
podcast.
yeah.
But at the same time, it's all good. It's all good.
Okay.
How big is your current space, and what do you use? And
Oh man, like this is why I'm so glad to do your podcast because I'm just obsessed with gear, you know. And I have it. We were living in an apartment. Like when I met you first, we were living in Harold's Cross, and we were living in a tiny little bungalow, and I had a studio set up in the corner, and it's just like an insect, just like growing legs, just getting bigger and bigger with different things coming in the door. And then when we moved to Sweden, I got all my gear over here. We were living in an apartment, and it just became like really weird, especially when you've like other children's parents coming over to the house, and the whole sitting room is just covered in synthesizers and stuff. And so, but we moved into a new place that has a basement, and it's just amazing. I have a room in here. I treated it myself with that's the acoustic curtain behind me there. I got decent monitors. And
what monitors do you have?
I have they're Neumanns, the KH310s, I think they're called.
Oh, very good. Yeah,
maybe that's the wrong name. They're brilliant. I was using the Adam P11As for the longest time, and I had a sub vest. You know those vests you can wear that have a sub. They kind of vibrate. Yeah, they're called sublab. That's sublab vests. You wear them and they look like a bulletproof vest basically, but it just does stuff under 100 hertz or something.
Right.
So you can feel the sub. It negates the need for a subwoofer apparently.
Right.
But then I wanted to upgrade, so I did a good bit of research and I found these Neumanns, and they go right down to 30 hertz.
Yeah.
And they're amazing. The sound stage on them is incredible. They do the whole frequency. They're just so nice. It's like, it felt to me at the time, like, you know, when you're a kid, you have a crappy acoustic guitar and then you get a good one. And it's like, holy shit, this is what a good acoustic. They were like that, basically. And I treated the room with the Sonar Works, you know, the reference 4.
Yes. Oh, you have it here as well?
I treated it. I had it on the headphones as well, because I used to check my mixes on headphones, which I found absolutely incredible on headphones. But then the room stuff, I find, I like it. I think it does something, but it's not as big a change as the headphones, maybe. I don't know. Maybe it's just my room. What do you think about it?
How high is the room?
It's quite a small enough room, actually. It's probably like about 7 feet high. 7.5, 8 feet high, I'd say.
Right.
Small enough.
A conversation for another day, but low ceilings are not great in the studio, so, you know.
Okay.
Yeah,
cool.
Yeah. If you want to find out, listen to the other podcast with Chris Walls, who is an acoustician.
I'm going to write that down now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to do that. Chris Walls.
Yeah, he's a lovely lad as well, and he's we had a right old rant about studios and all that.
I love that. I can't wait.
So the early stuff, as I say, was very much the kitchen sink and all.
Yeah.
And as the work developed, you got simpler in the construction, but also the sounds got better. Why do you think that was? Was that gear or?
I think it's to do with, well, A, gear, and B, knowing how to use the gear, you know?
Right.
Because you can actually, I think if I went back now with the exact same equipment that I did the first stuff on, and I didn't have anything else, I think it would probably...
Which was what?
It was a laptop, a Focusrite preamp, I had a blue, you know those blue microphones with a little circle on the top of them? One of them. And a Focusrite, like the cheapest Focusrite, the silver.
Oh, yes,
the silver
indeed.
preamp, you know that one?
Yeah.
The Voice Master or something it was called. One of them. And basically, like the conversion then was a Digi-Design, the rack mounted.
Digi-02.
Is that what they're called? Yeah, that was the conversion for me at that stage. So that's pretty much it. And then I had a MIDI keyboard and a couple of synths, but nothing major. So that was the first stuff. Nothing really, you know, nothing. And then when I eventually got signed, I got a good publishing deal and I got a good recording deal back in the time when they still did them. And I'd seen a lot of my friends spend it all on studio time and drugs or whatever else. So I just had this thing in my head, I'm just going to buy gear. So I ended up like basically spending, and still do, just buy all sorts of gear with any money I ever make that I don't have to spend on my day-to-day. I never buy clothes, but I buy gear, you know.
You sort of moved in a different direction than I have, because I sort of went through the gear thing and feel that I'm out the other side.
Yeah, it's funny you should say that one. Because that can be the thing. Like I was in a studio, Paul, right, and a guy had an EMT, like proper reverb, right? The EMT reverb is absolutely beautiful reverb, and he had the plug-in of the same reverb, and that's what he was using rather than using the actual reverb. And I was laughing with him, and he's like, "It kind of feels like because I have the actual thing, I'm allowed to use the plug-in."
Oh, right, okay.
You know? And I was just laughing. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I was like, yeah, and there maybe is not a huge amount of difference. Like I have a Curve Bender EQ, which is probably the most expensive thing in the studio, and I have the plug-in as well. And I tried to convince myself there's a huge difference, but if I'm really honest, I don't know if it's $7,000 worth of difference.
Yeah.
You know?
One of the future podcasts I've organised is for a lad called Simon Saywood, who is the company called Analog Tube, who make Fairchild reproductions.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
I seem to remember that the figure of 14 grand was mentioned in a
Yeah,
stereo one.
yeah.
So I'm looking forward to having a chat with him and maybe an argument about the quality of plugins.
Yeah, but I would argue against that in one way, is that I would argue that imperfection is the thing they don't get right. And the imperfection is the thing that actually makes the gear, like the non-linear distortion, the crazy stuff that doesn't happen twice, like, that stuff that's not modeled, that's on a day-to-day basis. Like I have a Manly Vary Moo, and the tubes, they heat up, they sound different when they're now, it's not, you can't get the same sound out of it all the time. And that to me is why it's like a little bit more interesting than plugins. But in terms of like bread and butter, it's like painting, I suppose, like it's like the type of paint you use. You can argue about how the paint is made, but at the end of the day, it's still fucking yellow paint.
Yeah.
And I think maybe when you get to the gear, when you're like me and you've gone through the gear thing, and I'm still kind of, I wouldn't say I'm still in it, but I've definitely got a lot of time for gear. You sometimes wonder, am I just like literally just arguing over thinking about this stuff on a level that's completely like insane?
Yeah. Now, I do think there's an argument for what I see behind you there, a modular synth, is it? There?
Yeah, it's a kind of a Frankenstein.
Like, things like that. That is the gear I would be interested in terms of making music. But compressors, EQs, who cares, really? Like, I know somebody cares, but
Well,
can you put on record that difference?
but you know what you can do, right? There's this a French term that I heard years ago called bricolage, right? And I think it was Thomas Bangleter from Daft Punk was talking about it. And basically, if you're using, like, it depends. If you want to have something like really pristine, then I think plugins and stuff are the way to go, right? But if you want to do something that's really characterful, you should use like really shit stuff and really high end stuff, and mix them
Blend
together
them.
and use them for color. You get color and you choose the color. And when you get to the point when you know how to choose the color, it becomes then very, very subtle. And the subtleties then are basically what you only get over years of doing it. And you can kind of hear the difference between a plug-in and none. Like there's some plugins where I can't hear the difference, but there's another, do you know Overstayer, that
Yes.
that company? Well, they have a modular stereo channel that's like a distortion thing. It's kind of like a Culture Vulture or something. And I have one of them. And then I was using the soft tube, um, the MAS, the saturation stuff, and it doesn't hold it. The saturation doesn't hold a candle to the hardware
Right.
unit, in my opinion. So there's some stuff they're getting right, and down the road maybe it'll be equal, but at the minute there's arguments.
Yeah. The reason why I call this podcast one way to do it was because there's a million ways to do it, and everybody's opinion is valid.
Exactly. There's no right way to do it. It's you're making the picture. You decide how you get to make the picture, and whatever works for you works. Like that's why when I'm talking to younger artists or whatever, it's definitely if you're thinking about that in the sense that I can't make my music unless I have the A, X, Y, and Z. That's wrong. That's totally wrong. You can make beautiful stuff with the cheapest stuff. You could make a beautiful record with a Sony dictaphone for €10 from a charity shop, no computer, anything. You could make a record with that, and it would be amazing if you have
the artistic input.
If you have it in you. Yeah.
Going back to your current studio, what do you use equipment-wise compared to the first?
Well, a big thing for me, a big.
The reason why I keep referring to the first stuff is because, like, it was so kind of its time, and maybe the playing wasn't as good, and maybe all that sort of stuff. So, like, I didn't feel the link I feel to the current or the later stuff. Now, is that me? Is it you? Is it the combination?
Oh yeah, I don't really listen to the earlier stuff. I play it live because it works well live. It's kind of fun to play live. But I haven't actually listened to it in years. I think if I went back, I'd probably be disgusted by a lot of it. But I mean, it's just you're getting through. You're moving on to the next thing. You're moving on to the next thing. People get afraid. They get afraid to do anything in case it's not perfect. But like it's never going to be perfect. Just get it done and move on to the next thing, and like just keep doing that until you die, basically.
Right.
It can resonate with somebody who's at that particular stage of their life as well. You know, some younger person might hear that crazy stuff and think that that's the stuff they like. You know, they don't like the later acoustic stuff because it's kind of boring and middle agey, you know, or whatever. But one thing I would say though, what a revelation for me in the last few years have been ribbon microphones.
Yes.
Like ribbon microphones to me are something that I wish I would have known about years ago, because I'm obsessed with reamping stuff and recording them with ribbons. I have two Royer or 121s, and I have one of the AEA or C for something's the big Elvis one, you know that one. And I use that for vocals now. And I just think ribbon microphones, man, ribbons and tubes to me are like the coolest shit going. You know, because they have a character. They're crispy without being intensely crispy. They have warmth. They have depth. They're silky. Like with the ribbon mic, you never have to use de-essers. Like very, very rarely have to use any de-essers. And also, like with soft synths as well. If you just use a soft synth, you don't do anything with it. It takes up so much bandwidth in a track. Like it can basically go from like fucking 15 hertz all the way up to bleeding 20 kilohertz, right? But if you reamp it, if you reamp the soft synth, you're able to place it within the track in a much more interesting
Right.
and considered way, you know. So
Yes.
yeah, but back in the day, it would have been just like a soft synth in Logic, like compressed to bit Jesus, limited to bit Jesus, and just fucking that's it. There you go, done.
Right.
You know, and like you listen to it, your ears feel like they're being fucking ripped open. But now it's more about, you know, the dynamics and texture. You know, interesting texture, yeah, and subtleties. Yeah. It's great. I reamp everything. I reamp vocals, reamp drums. I reamp synths, obviously guitars. I stick them through. I have a guitar. You know what I love doing as well recently, Paul, which is amazing, because I love tape. You know, so I have a few tape machines. I've got a Niagara tape machine and some other Sonys and stuff like that, and I love tape. But what I've discovered recently is a lot of the old samplers, like the Ensoniq EPS, the Casio FZ1 particularly, the Ikai S621, right? Those ones, if you sample into them or reamp into them basically at a kind of a lower bit rate, it's very much like tape. You get this beautiful tone from the old, like recording, like sampling in at like 9 kilohertz, you know, or, you know, super low. It's an amazing tool to make textures that are almost tapey but have a kind of a digital artifacty stuff going on as well. That's really interesting, and you get those old samplers for pretty cheap, like, because they're really unwieldy. I bought the FZ1. I nearly killed myself trying to bring it home. It's like the size of a coffin.
Yeah.
So like reamping and using old samplers and recording them with ribbon mics through like a Fender Champ or something like that. I mean, that's the joy, you know, finding textures that are interesting.
Is there a danger then with your engineer's head on? You won't be paying as much attention to the music.
Yeah, no, the answer to that is ergonomics. That's the answer to that question. Because what you have to be able to do is you have to be able to do things in a very fast and fluid motion.
Right.
So like you said about the guy with the mics all set up, like if I have to start setting up shit in order to resample it, the idea is gone.
Right.
But if I just know that if I press a button, I can start sampling into that, and I have a microphone, I can sing into, get it into that, or I can stick it through this really fast I have a guitar, I have a thing for guitar effects pedal switchers, but I use it to send sound to different places within the studio. So into the samplers, into the amp,
right.
into the tape machines. And so I'm basically able to send things wherever I want
quickly,
depending on the text. Quickly, and that way I'm able to stay in the sort of the songwriting mode, because there are weeks, in fact, when I will rethink the routing of the studio, and I will spend fucking ages like rerouting stuff, not making any music, just like coming up with a system, and then I'll take a break, and then I'll make music in that system. And that to me is like, it's so exciting. Then I have at the moment now, my big thing is to have live drums. You can see them behind me there. I have these polyend perks. They're like these yokes that you can trigger and they play drums. So they actually like you can send MIDI or a CV into them, and they basically are like little solenoid motors that hit the drum. So I have them set up over there,
Okay, can I have a look?
and you can like do crazy.
Can you point it?
Yeah, hang on. I'll bring this down here. Hang on. Let's bring this here. Hang on a second. So there we go. I don't know if you can. The light is not great down here, but if you look at this thing here, you see that
Yeah,
there? It's
yeah.
black. So it's like a ball on the end of a stick, and down over there, then which you can't see now, is like a little brain, and then coming into the BeatStep Pro, there's 4 of them coming out the back of it, and you can then program, and everything is synced up in the studio, so all the samplers are synced up to the synths and everything. So I can then start making like electronic beats on a sampler, and then start introducing electroacoustic elements in the drums there. And there's like, you can do crazy polyrhythmic shit, and you can also do hilariously funny 400 BPM fills and stuff like that. You know, you can do really funny shit. So that's my thing at the moment.
I've never even heard of those.
And then I have over here, I got this mic the other day for €4. Look at this thing, a little Philips.
Oh, right, okay,
mic.
yes.
And I have a little desk. with loads of crappy mics going into it, all being slammed into a drum or compressor, and just recording that drum kit in the corner there. And that's that at the moment. That's what's exciting me, you know, as I work on getting live stuff together and everything. But so it's like I just find stuff that's interesting to me, makes me feel, you know, like a child almost, in terms of like, what can I do with this, and then basically exploit it until I get bored with it, and then try and find something else that does the same thing, you know.
Right.
It sounds like a robot. Like, there is velocity on them. There is velocity, and it does work to a certain extent. But I mean, it's a big clicking wooden yoke, you know, kind of sticking out of a ball. So it sounds like somebody fucking falling down the stairs at the same time as playing it. It's got like, there's noises being made that don't sound human, basically, when it's being played the drums.
Right.
But like, if you like, I had really good success with them one time. Contact micing a pallet, you know, like a wooden pallet. And then the contact mics I was using these geophone contact mics that didn't pick up anything over 100 hertz. So you couldn't hear the clicks, and all you could hear was this like crazy wood percussion on the pallet. And that was really cool. So I'm always trying to think of interesting ways to use them. But I think as a replacement for a real drummer, they're not the one.
Right. I suppose it doesn't have a foot of stick as well.
No.
Yeah, so
it doesn't.
It would be a different thing.
Exactly.
Yeah, but they're fascinating indeed. In terms of the rest of your work, I mean, have you ever actually gone into a big studio and worked?
Yeah, twice. I've gone to the best studio I've ever been in my life is Black Box Studio in France. So we've been over to Black Box twice. Once with the Redneck Manifesto, where we recorded. Actually, we were there twice, were we? No, we were there once. We went once to record and once to mix. And then I was there once to record with Jape for the album Ocean of Frequency, and mix there as well at that stage. And that was incredible. We were working with David Odlum, who has actually just mixed my new record that's going to come out in September the 29th. And he was just brilliant. And we were doing like 20-hour days there. Do you know the studio Black Box at all? Paul?
I know the name, but I'm not familiar with it. So is it classic old France?
Yeah, it's like in the middle of nowhere, basically. It's in the middle of nowhere in France, near Reims. And it's like a big barn. The gear, they have the guy, Ian, who ran it, who unfortunately passed away after we'd been there, but he was from Chicago, the Chicago recording company. So the desk that's in there is the desk that Eye of the Tiger was made on, and the desk that Nutbush City Limits was made on. This desk, he shipped it over from Chicago, and he had like, I was playing bass, and he had like Curtis Mayfield's DI, and it was like this big heavy DI, and it was just like an incredible experience. And just microphones, forget about it. Like every mic you could ever want. And there's a German guy working there called Peter, who was the tech guy, kept everything ship shape. And yeah, it was brilliant. Like, it was great. You know, it was a trek to get there. It was expensive, but I loved it. Like, you know, if I could afford to do it, I'd probably do it all the time. But
yeah, because that was kind of my next question. Like, how do you go through all the options that a new studio, something like Black Box, would offer you? Is that the problem with a studio like that?
Well, you take guidance when you go to a studio, you know. That's why, like I was saying about having David there, who knows the studio inside out, who has heard what we're trying to do, and maybe is an extra member of the band at that point, and then
Right.
goes like, I think maybe we could try this. Like he was the one who introduced us to Royer or 121s on the mic on the cabs.
Right.
A 57 and a Royer on the cab, like that was introduced in Black Box, and then it was just like, holy shit, these things are like, this is go. It's like, so it was, it's a good learning. Like there are always people who know a lot more than you, and people who work full time in big studios obviously would be that. And you have to get the right. I'm sure there's situations where you go into the studio and it's a disaster because the people give you the wrong information that you need for your particular project. But we were very lucky in the fact that David got exactly what we were trying to do and was able to facilitate it using the vast stuff that was in the studio. So we didn't actually have to decide ourselves, in that situation. And then coming back from that, then I was able to sort of go, okay, I like that element, so maybe I'll try and kind of not rip it off, but like reproduce it here in my own studio and, keep a bit of that. So
Should we talk about your new project or new record?
yeah, like it's called Endless Thread, and it's an album of 9 songs, and it's the first like positive type album I've made in a good few years. I had like sort of problems with the old mental health for a while, and uh, I only kind of pulled myself out of it in the last year or year and a half. Stopped drinking alcohol, and this record feels like, in a way, reclaiming joy of music, to me, and for that reason, I'm very happy to be putting it out. So I think what it is for me, Paul, is that music has been a way to try and find information from the universe, basically. And when I was younger, I believed that finding that information would somehow heal me of any problems that I may have had. And I discovered after a while that it doesn't necessarily do that. It offers a temporary um, band aid on maybe bigger issues that sort of can't be healed. And I see a lot of musicians, like yourself, a lot of young musicians die. Maybe not so many now, but they do. And in the sense, I think what happens is, to a lot of musicians, is you reach a level of success and you realize, hang on a fucking second, this is not what I want. This is not going to heal me. And I think at that point, it
And
just
maybe made it worse as well.
it just because then you just go, well, where do I go from here? I mean, I was trying to get to this point for so long. I finally get here, and I feel worse than I did before I started. So where do you go from there? And where I went from there is to some pretty dark places over the years, where I tried to recalibrate my searching to see what exactly would be the thing that would give me some peace in my life. And only through all of that turbulence and some pretty hard decisions and all this kind of stuff, only through that now I feel like I'm coming out of that turbulence and going, okay, well, music is still extremely important. It's just, it's maybe just not the only thing that will heal me. There's other stuff that I need to do in order to stay healthy. Um, but I still fucking need music. Like I need it so much, and I need to create music because otherwise, it's pretty much the only thing I feel I can do that I'm good at in the world. So I need it, but now I'm coming from it, and this record I think shows. It sounds positive, it's the first thing I've done that sounds positive in years, and I feel like I feel finally now I can actually almost start again, and just be with the wisdom of not looking for it to perform something for me that I can't do. I need to do that elsewhere. So
So
yeah,
is it Jape 2.0 then?
yeah, I would think that, I would think it's 2.0, and just, you know, there's a quote, I think it's Philip Larkin, it says the first half of life is fear and the second half of life is boredom. But I don't subscribe to that theory at all, because now I still feel like I feel like a child. Creatively I feel like a child, and I'm just very excited to work. That's it. Just excited to work, and hopefully I can continue to work and survive creating work, And if I can manage to do that, that will just make me, that's what I feel like I'm here for. And I don't know if that's going to be the case. And like I said, it feels like last day of Rome in some ways, but I put this record out and see what happens, and like stay positive and continue to work. And yeah, I might sound a bit cheesy, but I feel so blessed to have come out the other side of a lot of stuff. And I feel so blessed to be able to continue to make music and still create,
So that's Richie Egan's way to do it. Many thanks to Richie for taking the time to chat. Please visit www.geniusmove.ie to find out about audio courses to suit you. Thanks for listening.